Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Anna Hooven with SEPTA. I'm the Program Director for KOP Rail. We're excited to talk to you tonight about transit-oriented communities. Before we get into the content, I just want to go over a few administrative items. The webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be posted on the project's website, kingofprussiarail.com/TOC. Please use the Q&A feature to ask questions during the webinar. We encourage you to provide comments and feedback in the chat, but please note the chat can only be seen by the hosts and panelists and won't be visible to all attendees. We are aware that there's a thunderstorm. Some people have been getting alerts on their phone if you're in the Philadelphia area. So safety first and foremost. If you lose power for any reason, obviously stay safe. This is being recorded, so no need to worry about that. So as I mentioned, tonight's webinar will feature an overview of a transit-oriented communities study, which is looking at the connections to and around KOP rail stations. I'll go through the agenda first and then do a project overview. Then we'll get into the station analysis and strategic approach, looking at several of the stations, including Henderson Road Station, Allendale Road and Mall Boulevard stations, and First Avenue stations. Then we'll leave time at the end for question and answer and recap with our conclusions from the discussion and next steps for additional work the SEPTA team will be doing, and then future TOC meetings coming up. So project introduction. First, it's worth stating why this project is so critical to the future of our region. By providing a congestion-free transit connection to King of Prussia, Philadelphia, Norristown, and other destinations in Montgomery and Delaware counties, KOP Rail will help drive growth and opportunity for the greater Philadelphia region. The project connects Greater Philadelphia's three largest employment centers: Center City, University City, and King of Prussia. KOP Rail will help drive growth and opportunity for the region. This includes stimulating 5.3 million square feet of new development, 2.5 billion in property values across the region, 8,000 permanent new jobs, and 636 million in additional annual earnings across southeastern PA. KOP Rail will reduce travel time to and from Center City from 75 minutes to 45 minutes, significantly less than a typical trip on heavily congested 76, which I'm sure we've all experienced. KOP Rail's new service and associated activity will increase downtown King of Prussia's commercial property value to 260 million, providing a strong and stable tax base that will continue to keep taxes low. KOP Rail will lower levels of air pollution as a result of fewer miles driven and reduced engine idling. The estimated total value of air pollution reduction ranges from approximately 1.5 million to 1.9 million annually. The project is currently advancing to 30% design this April and is in the Federal Transit Administration's New Starts program. The project formally entered the FTA's project development phase in October 2021. And through this process, we'll seek up to 50% funding from the FTA. The current project schedule plans to advance design through 2024, with construction starting shortly after. While we progress the project design, we want to make sure it continues to support the goals of our region and communities. So tonight, we're looking for your feedback on potential connections at and around the stations, including sidewalks and trails to help share the area around the stations. Now I will hand it over to Craig Splinar, who is supporting SEPTA through this process.
Thank you, Anna. Good evening. My name is Craig Sklenar. I lead our transit-oriented community initiative at Stantec's Urban Places Group, based out of the Montreal office, but we work across North America with a variety of cities tackling this particular issue. And it's an exciting opportunity to think about how does this rail investment grow a community, provide additional opportunity in a community, and create the places that we all want to add to over time as well. I want to talk a little bit about our project goals in this particular piece. While Anna talked about the rail itself, our piece is really about the land use component. And so we're wanting to make sure that the land use and transportation initiatives complement each other while also maximizing the benefits of transit for the communities that it's serving. With that means looking at transformation over time, where that transformation may happen, any gaps in the sidewalks to help promote walkability or bicycling, and the sort of placemaking components that would fit within the context of each of these station areas. I do want to note that we're going to have 3 polls tonight, just a little quick interactive with you that will pop up. We'd really ask you to participate within that, and there will be time to answer questions as we wrap up this presentation tonight. I want to begin with a little bit of a primer concerning transit-oriented communities. What does this mean? What do we mean when we talk about this? For us, it means 3 things. It's the 3 Ds: density, diversity, and design. When we talk about density, it's not just about putting high rises next to station areas, but it's about curating the right kind of housing typologies, development typologies that would complement existing communities, but provide a variety of housing offerings or job offerings in the area itself. When we talk about diversity, it's not just about the people, but it's really the who, the what, where, and when of a site itself. So it's everything from building typologies, the types of activities along the corridor that may complement each other, as well as that population, not just who's here today, but who's wanting to be here or looking for an opportunity to live in the community itself, but may not have those opportunities unless it's in these types of communities. And then lastly is design. This is sort of the devil's in the details. Really matters for us to understand the private development side and the public realm, and how does it interface with each other? How do we connect these through different policies and regulations so that everything meets in the middle and creates this seamless interface in our communities? For this project, we have 4 guiding principles. These are from previous study elements. We're just adding to that as we move forward. First is the PEDs and pedestrian and bicyclists. We want to make sure that from the station itself, you become a pedestrian or bicyclist at some point, whether it's transferring to a bus and then walking your last piece, or walking from the station to somewhere else. So we want to make sure that that environment's comfortable and direct and clear and safe. Development is part of this. We want to encourage development that help create vibrant neighborhoods and manage growth, so that we're really thinking about it in a strategic way, and that everyone understands the opportunities and possibilities, and looking around those corners to understand what market pressures may change once this rail line is built and operating. We want to create places. We want to capitalize as stations as placemaking opportunities. So we want to think about them as far as are there areas of gathering or park spaces or plazas or great architecture that needs to interface with that as well. And then lastly is we want to elevate the transit experience. Quite literally, we just want to make sure that people that are riders by choice, but also riders by need, feel comfortable, that it's a mode of choice for them, that it feels safe and reliable. And that all starts at the ground level and works its way up into the platform and beyond. This is not a project about detailed design. We will in later sessions show concepts of these station areas of the possibility based on market conditions. But we just want to reiterate that this is at our concept and design stage. This is to help to inform policies and practices that can help anticipate these changes over time. So we were trying to think broadly about this and what does it mean for implementation, and breaking that down as we move forward. This is built on the original analysis done by the DVRPC in 2019, and we'll talk a little bit about the influences of that right now. So some of the key takeaways that we had from this report, it was a really great report of understanding the physical area in that time. 4 key components: transit-oriented development, so the buildings themselves. We need to understand how we can diversify building types that are complementary to the existing community, identify any regulatory changes, zoning codes, or policies that would help support that, but also wanting to make sure that we support ideas around parking management, because while transit may be a key component within this, we recognize and understand that parking will continue to play a role, but how can we think about it in creative ways and make sure new development is right-sizing parking both for the users there, but also visitors and day-to-day needs. Pedestrian and bike infrastructure itself, we want to make sure we close the gaps around station areas and really improve safety. Safety is really top of mind when it comes to ped and bike, particularly at key intersections, which we'll talk about at each station. Placemaking is an additional consideration, both the public realm improvements, but also using parks and trails as connections through these areas and communities. And then lastly, we want to help identify any funding sources, toolkits, and an implementation plan that can help support these changes, should it be the public realm improvements themselves or signalization for traffic lights. We want to make sure we're thinking about this holistically, from the infrastructure to the private development side and the community benefit as well. Our engagement sessions are set up in three components. The first one is tonight, we're gathering ideas, we're highlighting to you opportunities and constraints that we see on the ground, both on our site visits, but also in analysis of previous work. We want you to weigh in on that as well. There will be a survey at the end of this presentation that will showcase each of the station areas, opportunities and constraints. So we'd really like your inputs. You live here day to day, like to hear your input. And then when we come back to you in April, we'll express to you what we've heard, show the work to date, how your comments have influenced that work, and discuss the strengths and weaknesses of each concepts collaboratively, so that we can come back to you on May 3rd of how all of that information informed the final report and any additional final comments, just to make sure we're getting it right at each stage of the work that we're doing here. As most people know, the proposed KOP Rail extension is an offshoot of the Norristown high-speed line. Sorry, these 5 stations are located throughout the KOP area. Henderson Road sort of on its own, but Allendale and Mall Boulevard in close proximity, but they have very different service needs. And then First and American are clustered with First and More. While they are within a walking distance, they also serve very different areas of the community itself. So we're going to pause here and just get a little read of the room to understand where everybody either lives or works in this area. The first question is, of these 5 station areas, which one do you live closest to? Note that there is sort of that 6th option if you live outside of Upper Merion Township. We'd like to know that as well. So a few seconds here. Okay, looks like majority living outside of Upper Merion. Okay, looks like majority of our users. Yeah, so we got 45% of you living outside of Merion Township. Highest ranking, 23% living around Henderson Road, 10 at Allendale, 6 at Mall, 10 at First American, and 8 at First and More. Then, great. We got one more question. If you don't live in the area, maybe you may answer differently. Of the 5 KOP rail stations, which one do you work closest to? Interesting. We're getting more than half work outside of Upper Merion Township. It looks like 15% of you near the Henderson Road Station, 3 at Ellendale, 13% at Mall Boulevard, 8% at First and American, and 10% at First and More, with 50% of you working outside of that. So we like to understand these pieces simply to see if you're living in this area, how the changes may be, or even if you're working in this area, how it may benefit you as well, or benefit people around you. We want to also just talk a little bit about the world, and both locally and nationally. Things are continuing to change, but we have we just have some demographic information that really highlights the need to think about this in very creative ways. The first is that household growth is faster than any county, with a projected 12.7% growth in 2026. As well, within that household growth, we see more renters coming on board. Now, that isn't just a local trend. We see that nationally as well. We'll get to that in the point in a minute. But we also see population growth driven by older adults and mid-career adults as well. So those may be people settling into long-term couples as well. People are living single longer these days, but looking for that growth as how it fits within household income as well. We see more disposable income, larger area income than elsewhere in the county. But nationally too, we see a growing trend of how families are living, and people are living very differently than they were 50 years ago or even 30 years ago. We see a traditional market for single family houses is shrinking throughout the entire nation. But we also, with that, our housing supply continues to not match the needs of people that are looking for a variety of housing that isn't single family. So it may be townhouses or multifamily, but our current supply doesn't match that demand. And so that's why we're seeing this continual housing conversation, is that we need to build a more variety of housing in different locations to provide that spectrum of living that people are looking for, both from what they choose to live in the market, but also that matches their affordability opportunity as well. We are seeing some shifts in the pandemic, and we don't really have a final answer for this yet. We have noted that there's an amplification of online shopping and delivery happening. How that grows into sort of a longer term component will continue to be monitored. We don't know what that really means for brick and mortar. We know that a lot of brick and mortar over time have closed during the pandemic, but we're seeing that growth resurge in more experiential retail. We know that the shrinking labor pool in all of the service industry components are continued conversation of how we deliver retail services, and that may result in more of that online shopping trend. But we also see a reduced need for office space. So it may be remote working or hotel flexing in the future. That demand in office continues to shrink over time. But what we do know is that live, work, play lifestyles continue to be a desired demand across the United States, including the transitions of shopping malls, suburban office remixes, and that demand for walkable communities in close proximity to public transit is one of the #1 amenities that people are looking for when they're looking for homes across the United States. We see this as an opportunity to talk about these station areas in an 18-hour community. We often may describe it in a 24-hour community, but in these areas, a site, say a retail shopping center, could be transformed into a mixed-use area that has different activities throughout the day that help create that walkability and variety of housing typologies. So we're trying to think of these station areas in that context. And with that, we want to start to dive into each of these station areas and our strategic approach. First is Henderson Road, and you're going to see a series of maps for each one. First are the constraints, the physical constraints that we talk about. Next is the physical opportunities. And then we'll show you some identification of where we're going to be studying the possibilities of transit-oriented communities within each of these station areas. To orient you a little bit, the purple dashed line is what we call a walk shed. That is a 10-minute walk from the station itself, which is analyzed through GIS to understand the connectivity of that station in its current form. And we're going to test this both before and after our concepts to look at what that 10-minute walk shed may look like in the future if we improve sidewalk connectivity and connections throughout the area. We do note a number of intersections that currently are uncomfortable intersections for pedestrians and bicyclists due to their current design. So we want to look at maybe potential upgrades to those or transformations that support additional infrastructure. It is a site that has a number of physical barriers. There's a utility line on the south side. But there are a number of block structures currently that have no sidewalks or gaps in the sidewalks that prevent that walkability context. Where we see some opportunities, though, are the improvement of intersections using Henderson Road as a great connectivity component and right-sizing the infrastructure in that area, as well as potentially connections to the proposed pathways and using the escarpment as an additional connection to the west. We have identified a couple of these parcels within this area for further study as we talk about transformation. Primarily, these are areas of likely to redevelop over time because of their vacancy rates or the retail, as we noted, the retail sector continues to be considered flexible at this time and repositioning at its time. So we're going to investigate these areas a little bit more to see the opportunity in these particular sites for transit-oriented communities. We've clustered the Allendale and Mall Boulevard stations together as well because of their near proximity. These are the two stations that primarily serve KOP Mall, but also serve some of that office component further to the west. There are a number of uncomfortable intersections for pedestrians in its current state with a large series of sidewalk gaps within the network. The road network here is pretty auto-centric and the parcels are rather large. The walkability of this area is mixed and at best, with Allendale Road itself being the primary connector of people from those stations. And that's why you see that walk shed sort of extend further out from that station itself. We note that these are some of the most geometrically challenging station areas. And so we're really looking at what is the patron experience, the rider experience at these stations. How do we make sure if people are dropping off or are connecting or transferring buses? We're really looking at those components as well. But there are a few opportunities. Using Mall Boulevard as an opportunity to add additional pedestrian connectivity, looking at potential connections up Allendale Road itself and finding additional space within that existing right-of-way for additional sidewalks or bike paths and connections, but also improving all of those intersections throughout. Now, we are going to show a series of parcels in this area as potential likely development opportunities. But we do want to note that these are really looking at that high level component. While they aren't all going to happen overnight, what we're really trying to look at is at those particular station areas, what are the opportunities? We know like Toys R Us is currently vacant. There are a couple of retail parcels too that we're examining within that. And we'll come back to you with that story in April within these areas. But we see these as really, while challenging, really unique opportunities to interface with the mall, interface with the station, and create little nodes of community at each one. Lastly, our First Avenue stations. These are in the KOP Business Park primarily. First being one of the larger connector roads and having the linear park program as part of this continues that strength of connectivity over time. Being an end of line at First and Moore and connecting to Valley Forge as a connector through either bus service or future trailways is going to be important. But also noting that there is elements of nature. There are, while they may be a constraint with floodplains, we see them also as opportunities for potentially adding additional amenity over time or interfacing development with those pieces that are going to be highly desirable places to live or work. We continued looking at these sites based on the 2019 station area planning. A lot of this information as opportunities continues from that, reinforcing first as a east-west connector for ped and bike, but also the potential of adding those trail systems that were first identified in the 2019 study as part of this project to help support potential redevelopment over time. Now, in these particular areas, we are showing a rather large area of potential redevelopment or development parcels themselves. Want to note that at First and American, with the office component and the road network that's currently there, this is seen as an opportunity of transforming this into a small community node over time. But also at First and More with the end of line station, how do we create a complete community as part of that process? And seeing a number of parcels that are owned by single property owners at in large scale, these are great opportunities for us to potentially work with them as transformation or repositioning spaces over time. Our strategic approach for each one of these has three specific themes. I'm going to walk through them with you. These are sort of our guideposts as we're moving into the concept phase of this project. Mobility, how do we connect people to and from the station? What are our parking strategies? What kinds of ped bike improvements are going to be important? What kinds of bus service connecting to these stations? How does that work? And how do we make that a seamless experience? The built form, how do we make sure we have contextual understanding of new development with existing development, and how do we make sure any new development isn't as oppressive or big, but meets all the sort of needs that we're looking for in this area. And then lastly is that land use. What are the regulatory components that we need to figure out, whether it's just curating the existing zoning and tweaking it a little bit, or adding some additional policies that could help unlock a better option for these sites should they redevelop over time. So when we talk about mobility, we're really looking at things like complete streets. That is the sort of nature of adding to existing infrastructure to accommodate bikes and peds and transit itself. Looking at new connections, where may new roads potentially go through these larger parcel sites to create that connectivity to the station. Active transportation, so it's not the street component, but maybe pathways and trail systems that come to and from these areas. And then the transit connections themselves, that interface between bus and rail itself. Building typologies, we want to look at infill strategies rather than new development in the area. But this is an opportunity of introducing new building typologies, and they don't have to be high density. They can be this human scaled component that provides a variety of housing, both from townhomes and duplexes to apartment style buildings with ground floor retail. With this, we want to look at the building setback and orientation of these and provide guidance around that, as well as the parking options and the placemaking elements that go with that. So where should a new park go? Where should a plaza potentially? How would buildings orient around that? And providing that strategic direction. And then lastly is that land use component, looking at the introduction of mixed use buildings. We know some of these areas currently have zoning that allows for that, but we're examining it through the possibilities of transit-oriented communities and if there's any adjustments to that. Same thing with parking requirements, trying to right size and make sure we have the right parking supply in each of the areas that can provide both for new and visitors. And then looking at existing open spaces and how can we add to, or how can we connect through, that creates this connected green system. So I'm going to pause here. It's at our end of our presentation. It's really an orientation tonight of where the sites in their current form and our strategy. And I want to end with one more poll. After explaining these three strategies, which one of these would you see as your highest priority as we work through station concepts? We got a few more in here. Your winner looks like it's coming up. Oh, a few more. Sorry, don't want to influence. Okay, looks like 45% of you are looking at mobility as a top priority, land use coming in at second, and that built form. So this is really good information to understand how we can make sure we respond to these ideas when we come back to you in April, and we'll build upon those themes as we roll out concepts. Want to open up for questions, Q&A, and provide opportunity to answer anything that may be burning at this point.
Great, thanks, Craig. We did ask if anyone had questions during the registration process, so we'll start with a few of the questions that we got during the registration process, and then we'll turn to some of the questions that have both come in through the chat and through the Q&A feature. So there were a few different questions that came in about funding. So Anna, I was hoping you might be able to take the question about funding, and in particular, some people had questions about the recent infrastructure law. So do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Thanks, Christina, and thanks, Craig, for the overview and presentation. So how will KOP Rail be funded? As with all major transportation investments, KOP Rail will be funded with a combination of federal, state, and regional funds, private investment, and innovative finance options. As I mentioned at the beginning, up to 50% of costs could be funded from the FTA's New Starts program. New Starts is a competitive grant program that provides approximately $2.3 billion per year in funding to light rail, heavy rail, commuter rail, streetcar, and bus rapid transit projects across the United States, including extensions to existing systems like SEPTA's Norristown high-speed line. So that $2.3 billion per year can certainly be expanded, and the FTA has indicated that there may be additional funds overall with the stimulus funding specific for the New Starts program. And within that program, SEPTA is competing against projects across the US for these funds. So by receiving New Start funding, SEPTA will be bringing federal investments to the greater Philadelphia region, as opposed to funds benefiting another region. SEPTA is seeking federal funding for King of Prussia Rail separate from our other transit projects. We're not redirecting federal money from Philadelphia transportation needs or potential projects. And I know just recently in the news, there's been articles about the infrastructure bill and some of the other separate projects that SEPTA is progressing. So we aren't competing against those projects, and certainly a lot of the existing new funding is headed to things other than KOP Rail. So we're progressing this along with our other projects that are certainly important for the region.
Great, thanks, Anna. Another question that came in is, how can you address the addition of this new spur? How will this new addition affect the current service frequency on the Norristown high-speed line?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So KOP Rail will not reduce the service to existing stations. And in fact, the current operations plans calls for increased service on the line. So this includes trains that will run from 69th Street to both Norristown Transportation Center, as it does today, and to King of Prussia. There will also be service directly between Norristown Transportation Center and King of Prussia without a transfer. So in terms of frequency, service will include trains running roughly every 15 minutes from 69th Street to King of Prussia and 69th Street to Norristown, to and from, and then roughly every 20 minutes from King of Prussia to Norristown Transportation Center and vice versa.
That's a great segue into our next question, which is, what is the approximate travel time, including transfers? What would it cost to ride?
Okay, so the current approximate travel times, including transfers from Center City to King of Prussia. So that would include a transfer at 69th Street, and that would be approximately 45 minutes, including that transfer time. So that is less than a typical trip on the expressway for a similar trip. I took the train out to that area today, but then got stuck driving home in a lot of traffic. And I'm sure everyone else has had that experience also. So this is less than a typical trip on the Schuylkill, unless you hit it at that perfect sweet spot, which never seems to exist. So that can take up to 75 minutes. So that 45-minute trip time would be a great improvement from sitting in traffic on the Schuylkill. And then the second piece of that question was, what is the approximate cost for the ride? So fare for this service hasn't been set yet, but the current fare for the Norristown High Speed Line is $2 if you're using a SEPTA key card, and that does include one free transfer.
Great, thanks, Anna. We also have a question. Does SEPTA have any current plans for shuttle or bus connections within KOP to make it safer or easier for pedestrians to navigate?
That's a good question. I might defer to Ryan to see if you have specific input on this. Ryan Judge is helping lead this effort too, and I know is well versed on the shuttle service.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. We're working through a number of different concepts to provide those sorts of first mile, last mile connections to and from stations as a part of this project. As a separate effort, SEPTA is also undergoing what's referred to as Bus Revolution, which is a comprehensive redesign of our entire bus network. And as a part of that, we'll be looking at bus services in King of Prussia and in the entire region as a whole right now.
Thanks, Ryan.
And I think I actually just saw another question come in on the Q&A that kind of relates to that about shuttle service in and around the mall areas. I think that kind of answers that question as well.
So there was also a question, I guess the flip side of the bus and shuttle and transit side of the coin is we have a participant who lives along the 202 corridor, and she's wondering about what the parking will be like at the stations.
So yeah, we'll have parking at the two end stations. The parking numbers aren't totally finalized yet, but there's parking at Henderson Road and then First and More. So First and More would be usually what's in the works right now is a larger parking structure. So I think right now up to 500, but we're trying to figure out those numbers. And then Henderson is around 150, I believe, but Ryan, correct me on any of those numbers. And then the three middle stations would not have parking at the station.
Great, thanks. We have some questions from existing riders who are wondering about if they live along the current Norristown High Speed Line, are there any potential improvements that are being considered at existing stations?
Yeah, good question. So we are looking at improvements right now. There's several projects in the works as part of SEPTA's capital plan. So some of those stations, I'm trying to think offhand right now what those stations are, but DeKalb is in design right now. We recently did major renovations at our stadium station, and then Villanova is also under design right now for improvements. So as we're allocating funds in our capital budget to improve some of these older stations, they're certainly being prioritized by need and condition, and then looking at ridership at each of the stations. So some of those are the ones that are in design right now and that have recently been redone.
Great. We had a question. What are some examples of other unique community outreach programs you have seen provided in other similar rail projects to gain early community adoption and continued growth during and after launch?
Good question. We have looked to other transit agencies to see what they have been doing. Chicago had opened a storefront along the alignment that would allow people to come in, learn more about the project and give their input. And that's certainly something we'd be looking at doing too. So we're continuing to work with our peers to identify what's worked best, and we'd be open to suggestions also from the group here and community as we progress these efforts. We realize that getting community support is really critical to the project.
Great. And I do see a question here about how many people were included on this webinar and in poll results. So right now, I will let you know we have had over 70, we're at 82 participants right now. So that includes panelists as well. So we had a few more earlier. So just for the people who are wondering about how many people were on. Then we have a question here. The first and more station is more of a comment than a question, but the first and more station should be designed so that no structural parts would interfere with the possible extension of the line in the future. Do you want to comment on that, Anna?
Sorry, can you repeat the statement?
Yeah, the first and more station should be designed such that no structural parts would interfere with possible extensions of the line at some future date.
Yes, that's a good point, and we would certainly consider that. So I'm guessing the comment is talking about extending it further out west. So yeah, it's currently being designed as the terminal station, but there would be nothing prohibiting future extension.
Great. We also have a question about is the proposed route the original concept, or was the original idea to extend the line directly from Norristown?
I may throw this to Ryan. Sorry, Ryan, since you've been involved longer than I have and know the intimate history of the project.
That's fine. This has been the approach for a number of years at this point as a spur of the existing Norristown high-speed line. There was a long list of alternatives that was discovered back in the alternatives analysis process over 10 years ago at this point. We started with a list of about 30 different options and dwindled that down through a variety of screening efforts. There were some options that looked at different extensions and different types of services, but ultimately the spur of the existing Norristown high-speed line provided the most benefit to serve the areas and the goals of the project.
Great. We also have a question about an opportunity for community beautification and garden spaces at stations. Craig, I feel like you know a little bit about this with urban design. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think certainly that's the kind of information we'd like to know, is what is maybe the community desire to do that, and how SEPTA could play a role in facilitating that. But part of our station concepts are looking at that landscape piece, and then I think now top of mind is where could that potentially go in these station areas, and we'll explore that in the next few weeks. SEPTA, do you have any? Sorry, I don't work in and out of SEPTA, but are there any community garden programs at station areas?
I think it's station by station. We certainly work with the local community to determine if that's a need or want or something they would want to take over in the future once the station's constructed. But yeah, I agree. We would look to be incorporating what we can with that.
Part of the great opportunity we're doing by looking at land use while the transit piece is being considered for construction is that we can anticipate and think proactively about these great community asset pieces and put it into our implementation program or feed it into the design of the project, so that these things are always top of mind as we move forward. So there's more community ownership within these pieces, and that it's something to point of pride within your community.
Great. We had a question. Does this route intersect with any historic areas?
I can answer that one. There's, So when we went through the environmental impact statement, there were a number of historic resources that were identified in the region. This project doesn't have any outstanding impacts on those. The one exception I would say is the Pico corridor that this alignment uses is considered a historical resource. So there's some mitigation efforts we have committed to as a part of the environmental impact statement. because that is a contributing asset to a historical district, but there aren't any other historic areas associated with the project.
Great, thanks. Jason asks, will there be a bike connection between the new Chester Valley Trail extension and the Henderson Road station? Anna, do you want to take that one?
Sure, we're certainly considering and maintaining the ability to connect to the future Chester Valley Trail. So any design would allow for that connection.
Great, thanks. And let's see, we have questions coming in fast and furious, so I'm trying to keep up. Has any consideration been given to equipment other than what is currently being used? Anna, do you want to take that one?
In terms of the vehicles, so yeah,
the person was specifically interested in some environmentally friendly options.
Okay, so the use of, some options like hydrogen fuel cell, I think I see in the chat Alstrom hydrogen equipment. So the use of that has not been evaluated for this project. The Norristown high-speed line currently uses third rail power supply, and SEPTA is in the process of converting much of our system to renewable energy. So the proposed line, the extension, would be the same third rail power. But in terms of SEPTA as a whole, we recently opened a solar farm in Pennsylvania that will provide 20% of the power needed for SEPTA's facilities and operations. And then in terms of other environmental considerations, we're leaving the ability at the stations to have, car charging equipment. If that should be installed in the future, we're not at that level of design right now, but certainly making consideration for that. And then we have, for a lot of our communications and signals equipment, we do have a requirement in the design for solar power backup. It's not the primary, but as a backup option. So we are looking at what alternative energy we can be exploring for the project.
Great. I know that we are rapidly approaching the end of our time together, so I wanted to turn it back over to Craig so that he could close us out with a few remaining items.
Yeah, I just want to highlight a few things. First is April 6th will be our next meeting. This is where we discuss what we heard and where we're going. I want to note that while we show a number of parcels tonight, this is not about SEPTA taking land. This is about testing ideas within the community and showcasing the possibilities. So please keep that in mind as we start to roll out these concepts. This is about strategic understanding of the current zoning and the market opportunity, the possibility of some of these sites likely to redevelop in that 15 to 20 year time period, and what that could mean as far as scale and community. So we do have a survey that's out to talk about the broader spectrum pieces here today. We know that there were a couple of questions that we didn't answer because of the time that we have, and I'm really sorry about that. But we will send a summary of questions and responses as part of this. We just wanted to make sure people had time and highlight a few of those questions, with bigger questions that we had tonight. So April 6th meeting, is that what we heard, and showcasing some of those initial ideas. May 3rd will be that how it could look, the sort of final plan and action that we can wrap up and move into the next steps. And that now we'd like to hear from you in more detail. There is a survey at that link below. You can just take a quick snapshot of the QR code there, or you can, everything will be online tomorrow at kingofprussiarail.com/TOC. So I thank you for your time tonight, and look forward to seeing you in April.